Yeah. Yeah. It's
Okay.
not really in here, but it's basically the idea of like what brings value and what are you going to do with your time. So if it comes into the conversation, I'd be very excited to pick your brain on that.
You put yeah, right. That's your life. What you do with your time is your life.
Yeah. Right. Right. So
Yeah.
like, do you want to live for forever long or do you want to have higher value, quality of life and enjoyment of life? That stuff. So
Yeah.
that can come if we want to talk about it. Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Welcome back to the SimKit podcast today. And our podcast topic right now, I'm calling it the Good Vice podcast, where we'll be talking about kind of the positive ideas or maybe the effects that vices, things that are generally obviously thought of as negative, can have in someone's life, and kind of looking at that balance between indulgence and health. And I guess you'd even say like resiliency, certainly if you're thinking about a emergency medicine professional trying to get through a long career. So, whenever I start to think about the balance of work and life, considering the pros and cons, the benefits and drawbacks that happen, there's one person who particularly comes to mind for me who has been particularly influential for me. And that individual is the person you see on the screen opposite here with me today. This is Dr. Rob Orman. He has been influential in so many spaces as a medical educator, learning from him in that way. And then now as a coach, working with physicians, finding meaning, resiliency, purpose in the careers that they have. And so, Rob, you're a perfect person. You have helped countless people in this space in generality. Obviously, I'm not saying specifically talking about good vices, but you have been a former guest on the podcast. You're a well-known voice to many. And so I decided to have you come back to sort of pick your brain, get your thoughts, and kind of have a conversation about this idea of the balance between indulgence, reward, and the potential idea of a good vice. So, Rob, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Jay, it's always a treat to get to chat with you, whether on a pod or informally. And this is a topic that I can say I have never discussed or heard discussed on a podcast. That I'm stoked. I'm stoked to dig in. I'm curious to see where we're going here.
Yeah. I like having, sometimes we have a pretty well cut. We're going to talk about positive pressure ventilation and, when you adjust things or other topic matter. We talked about burnout, brass tacks, and work-life balance. Well, those are pretty regimented. This is more conversational. So I too am excited to see, the track as we build it and where the conversation
Oh,
goes. But
I love it. That's how our train's going, building the track as we go. Take it away, baby.
let's do it, right? And so the idea for this podcast came from just a general recognition and notion that many of us, and I guess the us here, emergency medicine, but I'm obviously coming with my emergency medicine hat on, and I know you work with clinicians and high stakes, high functioning professionals in a lot of space, but we work in a high stress, high acuity, high performance space, or we have that type of job. And within that, there's this sense, I feel anyway, and I'm sure this is a universal, there's a sense of relief almost of survivorship when you get through a crazy, busy shift.
Yeah.
Like, I am alive. My time has come to end. The old all bleeding stops. My shift will eventually end. I will sign out and I get to go home,
Yeah.
which is nice. And within that, sometimes I feel the need to reward myself, to unwind in some capacity when that end comes. So I'm sure I'm not alone in this area that there's oftentimes this maybe celebratory ritual, or as I said, reward that comes with a degree of an indulgence, right, for us. And I recently I asked myself an important question of, is this a bad thing?
Mm.
Is my celebratory ritual or my indulgence, is it a bad thing for me as a human being, as a professional? Am I affecting my body in a negative way? So from that, there's some science about self-reward, treats, indulgences, and vices. And so, Rob, I dove into that, and I'm curious. You want to hear what I found?
Oh, not only that, I have so many questions for you about the stuff you're talking about. I want to know, what is this indulgence that you have in your mind? What is this thing that has triggered this podcast? Yes, first science and then the reveal.
Sure, sure. I will give you my reveal of my indulgence at the end.
Okay,
So,
okay.
looking into the idea when I was like, man, are these things that we're doing or that I'm doing, is it good or bad for me? This is really going to be psychology data, right? That seems to be where most of this information lives, in the sphere of psychology. And, this data in it suggests that people who do allow themselves small indulgences, and the definition of that is where we're going to kind of get into the weeds here, but give themselves these small indulgences, they're going to cope better with stress, and they're going to be able to pursue these long-term goals better than people who are really rigid and kind of uncompromising with themselves, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
right? So, examples here, there's a weight loss goal, and you may just be a hard hitter. I'm not going to, get anything sweet. Or you might be someone who, okay, I'm on track, 6 of the 7 days I'm doing fantastic. I'm going to have a very small indulgence on Sunday with a cookie, as an example. So people that actually allow that small, I don't know if the right term is cheat day or cheat activity, the reward.
Pause on that.
Sure.
I don't like that term. I never even thought about it because there's some shame that's associated with it. Oh, it's a cheat day. It's kind of, you know what it is, baby? It's a bonus day.
Yeah. A reward day.
Yeah.
Right?
We're changing nomenclature right now. It's, there's no cheat. There's no shame. Oh, enjoy.
If you earn it, right? Yeah, that's the idea. And that's that back and forth that comes with that. But yeah, when you have achieved certain degrees of milestones, you give yourself a reward rather than you're cheating or you're indulging. Those, again, I agree, that negative connotation. But so yeah, the psychology literature suggests those people are actually going to achieve their end goal more readily or more, a higher percentage of the time, which is great.
That brings to mind for me some of the literature on perfectionism, that perfectionists are less likely to complete their goals or even start projects than people who have more self-compassion or kind self-talk, because the perfectionist is much more rigid than the person who says, hey, you know what? I'm not perfect, but it's okay. Let's just roll with the punches and keep going.
Yeah, I could see that as true. And I think, we've talked in the past about, I could see a perfectionist, mind you, as we talked about SimKit and starting in and all the barriers and hurdles, like diving in and then seeing if there's water. That's an approach that is sometimes necessary. But a perfectionist may not be able to start a project like that without all of the unknowns being known. And that becomes a challenge in ever being able to begin, right? In its own way.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it goes back to that term you used before of rigidity. When, especially speaking to this audience, when does that serve you? Now, there's definitely, I'm going to follow a protocol or a pathway, but inherent to any mastery is flexibility. And I think that because if you're rigid and you can't adapt, anything that you're going to face, say in emergency medicine, is going to have some variable to it. And I know we're talking about vices, but I think that this is all connected to loosening up a little bit and surfing with the wave rather than trying to punch the wave and break it.
Yeah, sure. I like that. I like that analogy. And like, you're not going to control the nature of that. You can't control the nature of your work environment, those things, that rigidity, you can't win. You're going against forces, it's certainly in emergency medicine and in many high performance professions where you're just fighting against a force much greater than yourself.
Yeah. All right. Back to the science, my friend.
Yeah, the science, the psychology science. So, other areas, I think we're just kind of talking about where this can come to the fore. That indulgence of cookie, we're going to get away with it. We're going to give that reward of cookie as we reach our weight loss targets, our exercise targets, whatever it be. You continue in another project or path and you indulge or you give yourself a purchase toward a hobby that, it's an item that's more expensive than you might normally typically buy, but I've completed X, Y, or Z elements of this really dogged task, and I'm gonna buy that wonderful driver. I'm not a golfer. That's that wonderful driver that I've been eyeing for 6 months, as examples. And so that generally comes to the idea that people who allow themselves to have these nuggets of joy, they actually have collectively better emotional regulation. They're more likely to stop that maybe binge behavior that led to the excessive, weight gain or things along those lines. And very importantly, in emergency medicine, they're less likely to burn out in their career. So the permission of joy for yourself is, I think, a really important takeaway and language I don't typically think about in this space, but it's supported in the psychology literature.
Yeah, what we do focus on so much, what is the thing that drags you down? What is the thing that drags you down? And then how do you correct for that? Versus what is it that brings you joy in your job? And how do you double down on that? And for some, I have many friends who would begin or who do begin their shift with like a cup of Pete's coffee or Phil's coffee. And it's a ritual. It gets him in that mindset. Yeah. And it's a pre-reward. And some who do a coffee towards the end of their shift. Now, not too close to sleep. We don't want to condone that. Towards the end of the shift of, here it is. Here's my reward. And it just feels good. I've got a little dopamine and serotonin rather than some sort of antagonistic neurotransmitter, my limbic system firing, right? Different part of the brain. And we thrive on reward.
We do. Yeah. Yeah. That's right down the fairway for me. I usually halfway through shift have that. And I'm trying to do, like you said, maybe half decaf, half regular, whatever it be, depending on what time of day it is. If I'm going home to my kids, it's a shot of espresso in there too. Just kidding. We don't have an espresso machine, but halfway through the shift, I'll reward myself for that milestone with an additional, beverage of a, enjoyment variety, whether it be caffeinated or not. I'm very interested in, and it's almost a conversation for a future podcast because we're talking about how we reward ourselves end of shift, but that psychology of coming into shift rewarded with a right mindset is one I've never thought about before. So you're telling me that you have many clients or people that you're coaching that are giving themselves a reward as they prepare their mind for the busyness of emergency medicine?
Yeah. I mean, you operate in such a demanding area. And if you don't pregame, you are leaving a lot of scraps on the table. I mean, athletes pregame, musicians, well, some pregame to get themselves in the right mindset, the right physiology. And sometimes that has to do with a reward ritual. Sometimes it's just creating a certain mindset. And you have 100% control, 100% over your mindset when you enter that ED. You might start off the day on the wrong side of bed, but you can shift it. And sometimes that involves, all right, I know that this is going to be a bit of a trial. How do I account for that? I mean, you and I know that the physiology of one of those shifts is just hard. So, I know it's going to be hard. Let me give myself a little bit of a pre-trophy for jumping in there.
I like that. That brings me back to middle school. You get your participation award. We get your participation trophy just because you're in the parking lot of the.
Right. You get your parking lot trophy. I love it. As soon as you go into the parking deck, you get yourself a little ribbon.
I made it. I'm physically here. Yeah. I liked how you brought up the dopamine pathways and how we're not tricking our brain, but we're using our inherent neurotransmitters for our benefit, which I think is smart. And that's what I found in some of this research about the dopaminergic rewards that are associated. Our brain starts to associate these with small anticipated pleasures, right? So these bit of, small to moderate vices can actually increase our motivation, make these difficult routines like a a Monday shift in the emergency department, make them more sustainable, and actually improve our adherence to things like healthy habits. So it's interesting how we can use little bits of what might be thought of as a negative as a positive collectively.
Could you imagine associating the start of your workday with a dopaminergic surge, maybe even a little serotonin and oxytocin? I mean, it's just so contrary to what we generally envision how that's going to play out.
Yeah, right. That is the antithesis of what you think about how people are oftentimes, especially, we're recording in cold and flu season right now. Many of partners in the trenches are in the surge, the thick of it, and your drive in is the opposite of those receptors being activated. And so tricking or using a little bit of a reward on the front side, I love that idea. Not even one that I really thought about coming into this podcast. So,
and I'll honestly tell you, I hadn't thought about it either until you said it in this context. And I mean, gosh, because what is the term that is so often used for a shift? It is another day in the salt mines. I mean, it's kind of, you are already setting a, I don't know, you're setting the context. It's going to be a very unpleasant labor.
Yes. Yeah, you're right. And even the way you talk about those types of things and all of that, that's getting pretty meta. That's getting high level stuff for me. But I think that those are important things that maybe we record a pre-shift ritual
Okay.
or conversation for the future.
Yes. Back to vices. Let's
talk about what's bad for us and how it might be good for us. So, the psychology data is helpful, informative, but it doesn't answer the question for me. And here's your reveal, by the way. The question for me that came forward was, I was sitting after shift and I'm wondering, are the 2 fingers of whiskey that I have sitting on the couch after a shift, are they helping or harming me? So there you go. A little bit of alcohol.
Okay.
I love whiskey. I like scotch.
Yeah.
I'm not putting a 4-finger pour. It was that's 2 ounces. Depends on your glass size. So, but that was my area of question, is rewarding yourself for having that element of a glass of wine, a little bit of whiskey, those types of things that are commonplace. And I'd love to get a little further into the weeds and really start to delineate when that razor's edge starts getting a little sharp, nicotine, other substances, all that stuff, but areas. So let's coming back to my indulgence, alcohol, a little bit of alcohol to reward oneself after. Studies are showing that these, the regular positive emotions, even little ones like, I love to just sit down with my, my little bit of alcohol and decompress, think about the shift that I had and sip on that small quantity. Those little positive emotions help improve our stress hormone regulation and help, I can feel it, that sort of amp at, 10 or 11, you can feel your cardiovascular norepinephrine and epinephrine response just sort of starting to melt away. And, sitting on a couch and we've actually talked in the past how sometimes after a late shift, you could sit on the couch and try to numb your mind with a movie and find that 4 hours later when you should have gone to bed, you basically turned an evening shift into a night shift. But just getting on the couch, getting out of that environment, it in of itself is obviously going to, parasympathetic you to a degree. But there seems to be in that psychology literature that bit of reward is helpful too. That's further decreasing the high adrenergic tone that comes with working the shift that you do. So it's going to improve your sort of calm down rate. It's going to get those stress hormones down, get the cardiovascular system down. And there's actually some data that your emotional resilience might improve with this, which is a huge one. Yep. This is apparently the broaden and build effect in positive psychology. If people are interested in looking into it more, the broaden and build. So basically what they're saying is that this daily, treat, it gives a genuine pleasure response that physiologically can counterbalance the stressors of our work. And, of course, stress reduction itself has many downstream health benefits, et cetera, et cetera. So with all of that and the kind of domino effect that comes from it, it seems like these small indulgences have a, if you were a scale, it looks like it might weigh in the positive. But I'm curious, Rob, what do you think about that?
I have a couple questions for you about it's 2 fingers of whiskey that we're talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
2 fingers whiskey.
How far from the end of your shift, and you can even throw an outlier in here, do you start thinking about those 2 fingers of whiskey?
Oh, no, that's a great, it's a great area. It is not, I'm not very anticipatory.
Okay.
I'm not like halfway through shift, like, okay, alcohol. That's good.
Oh no,
Yeah,
and I'm not
good.
talking about the thirst for it. All the questions of do you drink it when you wake up? All these things. I just kind of yeah. I can see the off ramp. I can see the decompression.
Yeah, I'd say probably once I'm in my driveway, maybe
Okay.
would be the space where that comes up. Yeah.
And when you think about it, what do you think about?
I find that it's actually very sensory. Like, I use the little I don't like actually using ice. I like using whiskey stones. So like the clink of the whiskey stone into the glass and cold whiskey being poured in, and then a very cold taste with obviously whiskey has a bit of a burn to it. So I find that to be the most pleasant part of the ritual or experience.
Yeah. And it's almost like a boundary ritual that you're using with that sensory experience, and that burn is making a clear demarcation of what just happened and now my off ramping. Does that land with you?
Yeah, no, that holds true, I'd say. Yep.
So there's so many ways to look at all of this. And when you first mentioned vices a while ago, what popped into my mind was the dose makes the poison. And I think I would add that the intention also determines whether this is a dose of joy or a little dose of joy, or this is something becoming detrimental. And I was listening to an interview with Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters and Nirvana, and
absolutely love that guy.
Okay, yeah,
my first band I ever saw, Foo Fighters, Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Okay, that guy is so cool. And
yeah,
this was years ago. I don't know how many years ago. And the interviewer asked him, it says, "Do you have any guilty pleasures? Any guilty musical pleasures? Any musicians you listen to that would be that?" And he said, "Well, you know what? I love listening to Britney Spears, and that's not a guilty pleasure. It's just a pleasure. There's no guilty pleasures. Why would I feel guilty about that? Where would that shame come from that I'm listening to Britney Spears? It's just pleasure. No guilty pleasures." And we think, well, what would outside viewers think about what I'm doing? And it's a shame. Do I need to hide it? When you look at habit research, adding a little bit of joy at the end of a habit you're trying to form, and BJ Fogg, I think is his name, is the author of Tiny Habits. He calls this the shine. Putting the shine on the end of the new habit that you do, the reward, and that helps that habit become stickier, right? As you were talking about, that habit the thing that you do starts to get associated with the dopamine, and and we've all got things that we enjoy, that we naturally enjoy, that we seek out, that we'd even pay to do. The downside is when it starts to become a detriment. You were alluding to this, such as, if I'm starting to drink to excess to numb grief or pain,
right,
or stress, or am I going to, try to eat my emotions and binge eat, or watching TV? So let's talk about that. That's my vice, TV. If you want to call it a vice, I love watching a good TV show. My wife and I watch TV together. I love it. Watching TV can be such a delight until it's not. And I may have talked about this on the show, on this show before. I'm not sure. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this, that I used to watch 4 to 6 hours of TV after a late shift. You were talking about that. You turn
Yeah.
a swing shift into a night shift. So come home between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. Nobody's up. There's no accountability for going to bed. I'd sit down and I would begin the veg out marathon. And the next thing I knew is just hours had gone by because my brain couldn't shut down. And the longer I stayed up, I just felt more and more and more scrambled. Most physicians have a version of this, or many, let's say not most, many have a version of this. So it could be TV, it could be alcohol, it could be something else that we would think of as a vice. Now, exercise. So, well, is that a vice? Don't know.
Just about to bring that one
Yeah.
up. Yeah.
And
double-edged sword.
It's right. It's a double-edged sword. And so I realized I needed a better off-ramp. And, so basically what I liked TV, but I had this unending stream of digital comfort food, you could say. And so you've been talking about research. I want to talk about a little bit of German research for me. So this was 2007, and this was a workforce study. And they looked to see how do people effectively recover from job stress, which is somewhat of what we're talking about. You're sitting there with your 2 fingers of whiskey, you're drinking. It's kind of, okay, now I'm processing the day. I'm slowing things down. I'm dealing with this job stress. And recovery from that depends on 4 factors. There's detachment, which is mentally switching off from work. There is relaxation. So detachment, relaxation. There is restorative activity. So just doing some activity you really enjoy. And then there's mastery. That's kind of a big picture thing, which is having challenging non-work pursuits. I can really get into a flow state in something else. And also, and in the big picture, there's autonomy over your free time. But when we're talking about this moment, this moment after work, or the moment when the vice would come in, detachment shows the strongest link to both recovery and better mood, as you were talking about before, kind of resilience and feeling happier. So let's get back to that digital marathon, to that TV marathon. And, you were talking about before. So from a clinical standpoint, I was dealing with, or I was experiencing boundary erosion, where my physical body left work, but my mind was still there. It's still on, it's still processing. And that, that boundary erosion that I didn't fully leave work, that prevented detachment or full detachment, or at least substantial detachment. And so the ability to mentally disengage, and the TV watching shifted from something I enjoyed to maladaptive coping, which I think you were getting at before. Maladaptive, a behavior that feels like it helps in the moment, but it really makes things worse. That it was an escape behavior. And really what it did is it allowed me to avoid dealing with the fact that I couldn't wind down. It was just like this cycle that wouldn't end. TV's not technically a medicine, but I was self-medicating with the screen, trying to numb that residual activation instead of addressing it. And I think we've talked about the driveway debrief, right? This thing that this exercise I've got in my site of how to downregulate, how to detach, how to process. And it was born after those 4 to 6 hours
under that need.
of TV. Yeah. And so when something you enjoy becomes something you use compulsively to regulate your distress, then that becomes problematic use. And, without true detachment, your stress system stays on and the spillover just keeps going. And so it's, okay, I'm looking for a tool to do it, but then I'm not sure what the term was that you used before, but there's kind of an inflection point when it becomes, this is actually this little dose of reward versus this is escapist, problematic use.
Yeah. And I like that description and that sort of differentiation. And the line between detachment and escapism is actually pretty blurry,
Mm-hmm.
right? You could say, okay, yeah, you get home at 11. You should maybe watch an hour of TV, go to bed at midnight, get up at whatever time, 7:30. That's normal behavior. An hour of TV helps you detach, go to bed. And then, 5 hours of TV, that's escapism. That's,
Yeah.
that becomes clear. But the line between detachment and escapism is blurry and interesting for me. And it's obviously going to also be variable by the person, their home environment, and their needs outside of the work that they do.
I will say that, for the most part, there's a problem with escapism, but sometimes it's okay. So you're going to work thousands of hours at this job, and there's just these little bits of accumulated stress and sometimes trauma that we want to continually escape from and not face. And I heard one ED doc say this recently. Says, I take all of the stress of the shift and I put it in a dark closet in my soul that is filled with cobwebs and has no light. And I slam the door shut so that it never comes out. And I hope that door doesn't burst. Like, hey, we kind of need to really process what happens in these days and face it and turn towards it and think about, all right, what went well this day? What even just happened? Because we're getting far away from vices, but we are coming at, to processing and escapism. Mm-hmm. These memories of the day come back as fragments. They come back as ruminative fragments, not as, here's kind of this cohesive narrative that happened for the day. It's kind of this intrusive fragment. And when you process the day and consider what happened and look for the lessons learned, where I could have been better and what I did well, in it, whatever way you do it, you're putting it into a coherent narrative. And that helps you to process and also, even more so, integrate what happened in that day. Whereas the opposite is disintegration, where it becomes something that becomes an intrusive thought or becomes even, at its extreme PTSD versus, I'm integrating those experiences into who I am. That sounded weird. I'm integrating those experiences into my psyche versus the other side of this. So escape. Sometimes things are so bad, so freaking horrendous or heinous. You need to go watch 2 movies or just, go drink a beer and play pool and do. You just need to sublimate, or you need to just give it some freaking time and space. I'm not saying you need to go get hammered, but there are the outlier events where I'm not saying like, hey,
I got to do something different. Yeah.
Because that also, it's like, it can only be this reward here, also becomes rigidity. Yep. If you think, this can only be at this dose with this reward at this time. And if I don't do it that way, then I'm not doing it right. And then it's becoming problematic. It also benefits from some flexibility.
I appreciate that. That's interesting when you start getting into that space of like the really, really bad. For me, I don't know what the physical need comes out where, like, I don't have many shifts where I'm like, I'm going to go home and I'm just going to run until my legs are burning and my lungs are burning. Yeah. And like, there's like that physical release that happens. Whereas opposed to the typical shift, I've taken from you that idea of sitting in the garage, taking all the elements of the day, that bad interaction with a nurse, that mother who didn't appreciate the care given, put it in a balloon, cut the balloon, watch it float away, enter the house. And there's obviously different layers and different rituals that we all can do. But then for me, that 2 fingers of whiskey is kind of the next phase as I kind of incrementally go back into my regular life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, well, I want to ask you about that balloon. When we talk about boundary erosion, that is a beautiful boundary ritual of 2 fingers of whiskey. I'm sitting on my couch. I'm processing the day. I was there. I am now here. And you and I both know, is some of your brain still at work? Of course it is. It's not perfect. I mean, It'd be amazing if it was like walking through some sort of dimensional portal where it would completely squeegee off all the crap from the day. But alas, it's not. So the boundary ritual to account for the very likely boundary erosion, which is what's happening when you just continually escape, is it's very hard to outrun that boundary. You just got to consider, how do I create it? So is it a vice? Or is it, this is so bad. You know what? This is almost a dad joke. Is it a vice or is it a device?
That is a dad joke. It is. Yeah.
But you know what? Dad jokes are actually just jokes. And of late, they've really gotten a lot of social ostracism. But I think that they're okay.
Thumbs up on dad jokes. All right. I agree. I do them all the time. Yeah.
Wait, when
you
you tell a dad joke, do you say, "Was that a dad joke?" And then everyone says,
No. My kids all know that every joke I make to them is a dad joke. But I almost made one because you were talking about integrating.
Yeah.
And then you're disintegrating. And I'm like, if you do too much disintegration, you'll just completely erode away. Disintegration.
And now there are 2 listeners to the podcast, and it's actually you and me just listening to it.
Sorry, everybody.
Everybody has left the room.
I'm going to keep telling dad jokes. No.
So I want to bring up a vice question. I want to get back to this issue of vices, because my wife and I were talking about this before the pod, and we were thinking, okay, what are my Rob Orman, what are my vices? And it's definitely TV. And I still sometimes will just kind of veg out. It's kind of, oh gosh, I need to go to sleep, but I'm just kind of, stuck in this TV loop. And when I was in residency, and I'm even including when I was on rotations where I was doing every other night call, so you basically never sleep or leave the hospital. Throughout the entirety of residency, 4 years, I did not have one sip of caffeine.
Wow.
Not a single sip, because I thought it was a vice. And that if I had caffeine, I was lesser. It's like, I don't need that.
Interesting.
That is a vice. That's not good for me. Well, now we know the opposite. I don't drink coffee. I don't drink caffeinated tea. I don't drink any caffeine. And now I love green tea. My son and I just went to Japan. We went to Uji, where matcha was invented. We were watching matcha be made. We had it. It's just wonderful. I love it. I love the effect of caffeine. I love drinking it as a treat, maybe cup or 2 a day. And I think about that rigidity and that view of that inner dialogue of a little bit of self-judgment and shame over this thing that I had put up. I guess, I don't know if it was put up on a pedestal, but I had put a certain light on it that if I do that thing, which isn't going to freaking harm me, it's probably going to help me, that somehow I am either cheating, as we were talking about before, or I've lost something. I've lost some battle. So curious your thoughts on that.
I'm surprised by the Rob Orman of before being such that's a very rigid way of thinking and being, incredibly so.
Yeah.
I wonder if in your psyche was there any degree of superiorism, for lack of a better term, in like everybody else around you is drinking coffee and you're like, I don't need that to function and survive residency?
I hadn't thought about that. I'll bet you that there was. I'll bet you.
Yeah, some supremacy.
That kind of, I'm better than all y'all because I don't need this stuff.
Yeah, I don't drink coffee.
As I'm army crawling on the floor of a night shift. I'm so freaking tired.
Yeah, right.
Y'all are weak.
That's funny. Yeah. It's interesting getting in that space. And we talked a lot about how you think about the activity, and because of how you think about the activity, its benefit or lack thereof. And bringing us back, we're building a crazy train track as we drive. Bring us back to the vice topic. I find it really interesting and valuable in the positive psychological benefit and physiologic benefit that I talked about earlier is there if you see it as such, and what a crazy meta idea, right?
Yeah.
You have to recognize that this is a small thing that may have a very minimal negative impact on your body. But if you are able to treat yourself, to reward yourself, to amplify that positive emotional factor, you make that stronger, makes the negative physiologic impact even lower or lesser. Like your scale starts to tip even more in your favor, which is really interesting. Guilt and the psychological stressfulness of that's going to compound the the scale to tip in the other direction. And so there's a high degree of how you approach and how you think about your indulgences, your good vices, your rewards, all the different terms we've used for this activity post shift. But if you see it as a benefit to yourself, it truly is, which is fantastic and fascinating to me.
And we think that, you and I together and in our own silos, we talk a lot about mindset. And mindset can seem like it's kind of this nicety and you think a little bit differently. And I think what you're getting at is that mindset has a physiologic component. And there's research done by Ari Crum, and I think she's out of Stanford. And I'll say, actually, I was listening to a book where she was discussed. I was like, wait, I know her. Actually, I went to school with her brother, and like her dad was an Aikido teacher in my town, and I learned a lot from this awesome thing. But anyway, I was like, wow, she's really pretty amazing. But Ari Crum did this seminal research on mindset with, I think it was hotel housekeepers. And they told them, the housekeepers, that the work that they were doing was exercise, and that the harder they worked, the more it would benefit them. I'm probably getting the study wrong, but the housekeepers that they told this to had substantial improvements in fitness because of how they viewed what they were doing. And
no way.
This is, and I have talked about this on my show before, maybe your show too. This is my favorite mindset study in the history of humanity. It is the counterclockwise study. And have you heard of this study?
No.
This is, and it's in a book, and I believe the book is called Mindset. And it was done in 1979 with a group of men who were in their 70s. And they took these guys and they built a retreat center. I mean, it was a retreat center, and they built it up so that it would look like it was 20 years before. And when they went there, they were watching TV for 20 years before. They were dressing. They had to do the activities like, I don't know, flag football. I don't know what 50-year-old, well, actually I do, since I am. But
you are.
So they did the activities, and they had to talk as if, and they had to talk about the things that were happening then. So they were living, they truly had to basically method act as if they were 20 years younger. And some of these guys, by report, it's, I've never been able to find the details on this. I've only heard it, I think, from the study author, is that some of them actually had to be helped up the stairs when they were going into the retreat center. By the end of this, this is 1 week, mindset, how they're thinking. Strength, flexibility, hearing, vision, all improved.
Wow.
And when pictures of them at the end of the week were shown to independent reviewers, they identified those pictures as the younger selves. And this was just with mindset. So you're thinking, how I think about something, how I think about this thing of, here I go for my 2 fingers of whiskey. Oh, I so look forward to this. This is my boundary ritual. I worked hard, and now here is where I get to come home. Or I'm going to go do 100 burpees, and I love this. This is just how I get that out, and I'm going to become a civilian and a human being again. Versus, I am drinking these 2 fingers of whiskey because it is just an utter freaking dumpster fire, and nobody this, that, and this is, I just need this to numb my pain. I imagine that it's going to be a very different neurochemical response between those two, even though the action is the same.
Oh, totally. Totally. That's going back. You call that the rewind
The
clock or
counterclockwise study.
counterclockwise study?
Langer,
I got to
I think
find that
Langer
because
Langer
my
was
God,
the study author.
that's fascinating and mind blowing in its own way.
Yeah.
And well, yeah, I mean, mindset. I think that that's gonna in collectively that almost sums up the entire Good Vice podcast, right? It depends on your mindset.
Yeah.
But it really, I think it in totality for me, as we kind of chew on these ideas, it's going to come down to moderation, control, and response, right? So moderation, control, I guess those are almost the same. We have to be able to indulge or enjoy or reward and feel like we are the ones who are pressing the gas and pressing the brake. And as you mentioned, that's, I mean, for many and for people in my life throughout, any listener is going to recognize alcohol. That's one that you have to be very conscious and very careful of, because you can quickly become not the person on the gas or brake, not the one controlling the consumption at all those parts. And so having that ability to maintain that moderation, maintain your control on the gas and brake, and then, like we said, that mindset, that recognition that this is a small reward for a difficult task completed, that is where the physiologic benefit, the psychologic benefit comes in and outweighs any potential detriment in that space.
In addition to that, I think that some intellectual, or at least just honesty with self, is in order, because you can game this anyway. Say, oh, my intent is that this is a boundary ritual. And I was speaking with a client about this once, and said, I have some tequila when I get home, and okay, but I sure have a hard time sleeping after that. Okay, well, how much tequila do you have? I don't know, 7 or 8 shots. And okay, so what do you think that's doing? Well, I'm getting hammered. Okay, so there can be this kind of, well, those guys said that the intent is all that matters. And you say, okay, it's the moderation. Well, what's moderation? How's it impacting my life? How's it impacting my sleep? How's it impacting my physiology?
Yeah. And there's depends on your, the fabric from which you're cut, but there's a subconsciousness that is in there. And like you said, you can attempt to trick yourself, I think, into saying, oh yeah, this indulgence is good. But if you're trying to have an internal monologue about how that is every time you engage in it, or routinely you're checking your quantity of consumption of movies or alcohol or nicotine or any substance, then that's probably an indication that you might not be fully in control of that moderation side of things. And you start realistically, you start to lose your physical and psychological benefit, because deep down inside you're recognizing, okay, this is going beyond what is reward based, what is healthy. And so I don't know how true that holds for everyone. I'm curious, in your coaching experience, how you might talk people through this if they are in that space. But when you start to second guess the activity itself, might be a time for a stop point and recognition. Is this truly a reward for good behavior? Am I seeing it as such, so I'm maintaining that benefit, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I mean, you just so perfectly there. You don't have anything to add. And it's, I will think, frankly, sometimes there are those conversations on that level, but sometimes it's also, I can't stop. And then it's time to have some chemical dependency counseling or work. And it's kind of, okay, that's all right. I mean, sometimes, I know we've really kind of focused in on alcohol. I mean, there's a lot of different quote unquote vices, but when it's having a negative impact on your life and it's hard to pump the brakes on it, sometimes that just happens. And that might be genetic, that might be psychosocial, might be a combination of all of those. I mean, that happens. Okay. Just get a little help.
Yeah. And I mean, if you're going to play the odds, alcohol is probably the one most worth talking about from a societal standpoint. Nicotine, maybe in comparison, but yeah, those are things that are balanced. Is there a physiologic benefit to nicotine? Maybe an alertness, but you're not going to do it on shift. We talked about some of the physiologic benefits of the unwind process associated with alcohol, which is the sphere in which I live. So they're both worth taking on if you're a listener and thinking about in this space that we are, obviously. All right, so we kind of talked about what the term good vice, and we threw a lot of different ways to describe that in. Cheat and cheat day, we kind of threw that one out the window. The indulgence, the reward, those are kind of more in the framework where we might want to think. Indulgence itself actually has has that negative connotation in some regards that we, as we talked later in the podcast about, we wanted to move away from. And in these high performance professions like emergency medicine, like many other that Rob worked with, we come out of the work with the need to, correct me on your terms here, Rob, you want to not dissociate. You want to separate.
You want to detach.
Detach.
Thank you. I guess you could dissociate.
I know it's not dissociate. Yeah. You could dissociate, but then we have another problem. Ketamine. So you wanted to be able to detach. You want to be able to keep the two spaces separate. We actually even went into like a pre-shift ritual and prepping your mind and your neurotransmitters and receptors in a positive way going into the work that you do. And then on the other side, being able to stop, create some sort of physical or psychological barrier. We talked about, for me, the helium balloon full of all the activities, cutting the string, letting that fly away. And then some degree of reward is not necessarily bad, even if the activity itself might have some small physiologic negatives that could happen, like alcohol consumption. And so if you're in the space of recognizing that you are in control of the quantity consumed, whether it be exercise, TV, alcohol, nicotine, we talked about all those areas, in control and in moderation, recognize and reward yourself in that way and see this as a positive for a job well done. Your pros of that in terms of psychological stress management, cardiovascular de-escalation, the ability to get to sleep on time as the ER doc and the evening shift, all those benefits greatly outweigh the potential small harms that could come. When you get in the space of recognizing that you may no longer be in control of those quantities and you can't necessarily not do it related to that ritual or end of shift or what it be, that might be a time to look in the mirror, recognize a common potential problem of, substance dependency, addiction, etc. So how we think about it, how we allow ourselves to do that, and our mindset globally is the most important part of what could be a good vice.
The question that comes up for me as I hear you walk through that is, how does this serve me? And what does this cost me? And I think those are the two fundamental questions. If it is a little bit of dark chocolate at the end of a meal, how does it serve me? Well, it's just delightful if you're a dark chocolate lover, and it's, maybe there's some positive physiologic effect, maybe not. What does it cost me? Well, there's a little bit of sugar in here and a little bit of this and that, but probably not a huge cost. So, all right, net positive. Yeah, I eat 15 chocolate bars. I mean, I know we're kind of getting into food, and there's a lot associated with that. It's kind of, okay, how does that serve me? Well, I mean, I do like chocolate bars, but the cost of that is very high. And so, I mean, that's kind of a outlandish example, but that's the question for any of these things. And oftentimes, the things that bring us joy serve us massively. Because as you were saying in the beginning of this, before we even started recording, how you spend your time and where you put your thought is how you spend your life. And so if you enjoy these things, I mean, as far as we know, we just get one shot at this thing. And am I going to be rigid, or am I going to have flexibility and allow these things at least someplace in my life?
I like it. I love that conclusion. Yeah, we didn't dive into the spiritual element of that in its own right, but like enjoyment of life. having a life that may be a little bit shorter, but one that you really indulge in or you live fully is valuable. And yeah, I think that's a topic for another time.
Well,
for
hey,
sure.
I will say that if renunciation brings you joy, that's fine too. It doesn't have to be, well, you got to have a little treat here and there. It's kind of, I freaking love being an ascetic so much, and I get so much joy out of it. A-okay, no judgment.
Fair enough. I like that too. All right. Well, Dr. Orman, thank you so much for coming back on the podcast, for just talking back and forth with me about a pretty robust space, uncovering all the nuances of how we manage the stressful lives we live and how we can reward ourselves in that space and be conscious of, where the processes could get a little slippery, where the problems can develop. It was really informative for me to walk through, and I appreciate all of your insights and coming on the podcast once again.
Always a treat, my friend.